Hello, everyone. This is Andrew Shanks here with another Salesforce Shanks demo for you today. Today, we're going to talk about the automation on and off switch. So it is basically using some custom settings from Salesforce in order to, in bulk, basically turn off any flows you have and potentially also some validation rules. The main reason you would want this is if you are doing a bulk data upload and you want to kind of get things done a little bit quicker, but also don't want to max out SOQL or any other automation problems you can run into with Salesforce. This is super helpful. I've actually been using a semi-different method, which we'll talk about kind of first, deactivate automation. But first, also, I want to give a shout out to Bart and Salesforce Ben. So this is where I originally kind of saw this idea, and I was like, oh, I've used this, but in a different context. So I'll kind of play this out and show you how to do this, but also, doing it and adding a bit of a hierarchy. So saying this role can do it, this role can't. And then also shout out to Accidental Coder, who had something similar. It talks a little more about flows and gives some alternative options as well, which is, the more knowledge, the better, as I always say. All right, so we'll start kind of in my test account here. And the method that I had been using is on the user object. I have a field called deactivate automation, and it's just a checkbox field. And the reason that I was doing this is basically if you are in a larger organization, if you attach it to a user or profile, it makes it it's kind of easier, but it doesn't prevent automation running for everyone else. So if I want to do a bulk upload of, 20,000 records or 200,000 records that I know is going to take a couple hours, if I turn off all of the automation for the entire organization during those couple of hours, things aren't going to work as expected, and there's going to be a lot of issues and a lot of cleanup to do after the fact. So by changing it to just the, putting it on the user record, it allows me as an individual to say, when I'm uploading these, turn off the automation, but let everything else within the company continue to carry on. So to show the example, I've made this checkbox and checkbox reason field, and I have a validation rule that says if my user activation is false, deactivate automation is false, and the checkbox is true, checkbox reason cannot be blank. So just kind of show that in action, right? I get the validation rule. It's not working as intended. The validation rule is working as intended. Now, if I check my deactivate automation box, I should be able to save this now without any issue. So if I do this, and I'm now able to save this without having to put in a reason. So again, in a bulk upload, this is super helpful. This is an example on a validation rule. To do this in a flow, I always do it at the start of a flow. I just have an automation on or off decision. And then I have my user deactivate automation. Just searching for the user, and then the field deactivate automation equals true. And if that is true, then it basically just ends and stops the flow immediately. Otherwise, it will carry on and go to the other elements in the flow. So that's the way I have been doing it for quite some time. And now I'll show you Bart's option. Yep, and we will use custom settings. So where custom settings is nice is you're basically making fields and it always shows up. So versus, if you were going to do custom metadata in a flow, you'd have to do a get record to populate custom metadata and to get the fields that you want. Custom settings are always available with the setup, which makes it really nice. So I can use it in validation rules use it in flows, use it in workflows or process builder. I had done this a little bit with custom labels. The issue there is it's not available for validation rules. And with custom labels, it's based on what you type in. So if I just type in capital O lowercase n, but I'm looking for all lowercase letters, it's not going to function as nicely. So we'll start here in custom settings. We're going to create a new one, call it automation settings, just kind of following the steps that had been laid out. Right, and then once we have that, create custom fields. So we're going to make 2 checkboxes. First one is validation rules enabled. And I'm going to turn that on. So that means validation rules are able to run, and we want them to run as normal. And then we will also make a flow enabled checkbox. And make that checked as well. So that way we want it to run. And I'll kind of show you why we're separating this out. It's actually pretty nice the way that Bart set this up. Right, so we have these 2 fields. We need to go to manage in order to kind of get a default setup for the organization. So we'll create new, and they defaulted checked. So that's what we want. Great. What's really nice is you can also do this by profile. So let's say I'm setting this up for something where I want my billing users to be able to go in and update something that's billing related, but I don't want any other user to be able to do that. I can go to profile and find that specific user that I want. We'll just pick sales exec as an example here. And we want them to have some override capability, so we don't want the validation rules, let's say, to work for them. So that way they can manipulate the data how they need to without validation rules. So that way they'll be able to save records, and the validation rules will not kick off. So yeah, that shows up here. And then we just have a different view that shows that it is checked for that person or unchecked. I did make one other one that's just called Sandbox Org. So I'll show this in the flow as well, where we basically check if it's a sandbox org. And if it is, then we'll skip over some email notifications or email alerts. That way the flow doesn't die halfway through, and it will kind of finish running and testing in Sandbox, especially if you have the email deliverability turned off in your Sandbox. All right, so now that we have our custom settings set up, we are going to go back to the validation rule after I turn this off for myself. So that way the validation rule is working again. And we want to edit the validation rule. So it's checking that deactivate automation is false. And we want to do, so it'll be under setup, and it's in alphabetical order. So thankfully I only have 2 of these, so it's really easy to find. So I go to automation setting, and then I want validation rules enabled. And if that equals true, because again, if validation rules are enabled, I want them working correctly. So deactivate automation is false, so that is off, but validation rules enabled is true. Then the checkbox needs to be true, and the checkbox reason cannot be false, or sorry, cannot be blank. Oh, forgot my comma. There we go. All right, so to kind of test this in theory, right, if I try to save it, it's not letting me save because this is blank. So I will uncheck it. And then now if I want validation rules not to be working, I go back to my automation settings, click on manage, and then I will edit the org default because that's what I want to do at this time. And so now I turn this to false. So deactivate automation is still false, but now the validation rules enabled is also false. So when I go to edit this, I should be able to check it without putting in a checkbox reason, which I can. So super helpful, again, when doing bulk uploads of data, especially if it's a bit hodgepodge, it doesn't work. Or doesn't have all of the data or is missing some formatting. Right, so now I'll kind of show you the flow version of this. So in the flow, I already have my user deactivated automation equals true, and that means this is off. So now I'm going to add my setup, and this is for custom settings, and then I need to refresh. So that way it shows up. Right, so setup and then automation setting flows enabled or validation rules enabled. So since I'm with flows, I want to see if this is false. So if it is false, then that means it's disabled technically. So I do not want the flow to run. Right, so if I came to save and debug, which we'll see how this goes. Right, so I have the decision and the automation setting is true. So because it does not equal false, it carried on and I went to the sandbox org where I have this set to true. And so that way I avoid this email alert, which would cause the flow to fail. All right, if we update this, so we're back at our custom setting, we disable and then retest. I need to refresh. Oh, I know. Gotta check the logic. Needs to be or. So deactivate automation or flow enabled is false. That's what it needs to be. Perfect. So because deactivate automation, or sorry, flow enabled is false, basically end the flow. And that way you save myself the hassle. What you can also do now in API version 55 is in the settings, this one doesn't have it, but you could do this in the formula for entry criteria. And if you are, you can basically just put this criteria in the beginning as a formula. So that way it doesn't even run, doesn't even do the decision and go to the end. So that's one way to kind of speed things up as well. So that's two great ways to do it. Again, custom settings, being able to limit it by, automation on off, or if you want to take it at the user level, so that way you can shut it off just for the individual and not the entire organization, which is great for, during business hours. You can use the deactivate automation option for the individual or on the user record. So it's two different ways to do it, two great options. I'll be sure to include the link for both BART's and for the accidental coders articles, both in the description here of the video. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. If you do this a totally different way, I'm totally interested in learning more about it. So just leave a comment, engage, and hope you have a great day.